Welcome back to another episode of Stack Racks TV, Stack Rack Boxing, where we talk boxing, but we do talk cash from time to time. It just is what it is, right? Today I'm gonna be weighing in on Boots and Xander. You know, I've been seeing a lot of content on this fight, and I feel like a lot of the content that I've been seeing has been misrepresenting one fighter over another, in one way or another. For me, what I'm seeing a lot is, Xander is a good fighter. He's coming up. He doesn't have the most experience, but he's a fighter that he's willing to get in there. He's willing to lay it all on the line. He has experience, but he's not seasoned under those lights, right? Again, he's a stationary fighter. He's a fighter that likes to throw, a bunch of shots. He has a nice jab, but he's really banking on a fighter coming in being stationary or running tired and looking to stay flat-footed in exchange. That's where it plays into his advantages. Where they're misrepresenting Boots is that this guy is the creme de la creme. Say what you want to say about Philly, say what you want to say about him. He might not can talk shit as good as everybody else, but this guy can fight better than a lot of these guys. You see what I'm saying? And in this sport, it's not about what you're saying, as much as how you're going in there and performing. And I feel like Boots is 100% focused on this performance. Again, we seen what happened in that one Monvia fight with Rashidi Ellis. He jumped right. Even though he was already a beat fighter, prior to catching him with that shot, right? Went in there and made it easy. Went in there and made it look easy. You know what I'm saying? And blew him out the water. Since then he hasn't been the same, right? And I'm looking to see if he turns that switch on going into this Xander Zayas fight, because he is so green. Now, Boots has a lot of fights, right? Which assists him, in being able to fight under these lights. He's been gaining the confidence over these years, fighting these Karens, fighting at home. He's been gaining the confidence needed, to perform at a high level under these lights. So he's been getting used to it. Xander Zayas is, he's still new to this, right? With Boots, the only thing is we haven't seen him fight that kind of opposition that we want to see him fight, right? So hopefully he go in there and get this W, right? And he does it in a convincing way so that fans are left satisfied, so that he could propel his career from the fight versus, you don't went in there and beat a guy, tough guy coming up, champ, you went in there and then beat this guy and, now I went to the wayside, because you didn't dominate, I feel like he's going into this fight knowing that, he has to go in there and show that he's levels above this guy. What we've seen lately from Boots is that he's going to go in there and fight to the level of his competition, right? What we want to see in this fight, or at least I want to see in this fight, I want to see bro go in there and, show that there's levels, because he's that good. That's what I'm saying. He's that good. You understand what I'm saying? And we all know this guy. I was that guy in school. It might be 2 or 3 guys, in the same grade. They the fastest. One play ball the best. This dude play soccer the best. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I want y'all to understand, that's what I'm seeing in a lot of these breakdowns of this fight. People dismissing the skill that Boots has, right? Every fighter is not going to come into each fight the same, right? Boots knows the magnitude of this fight, just like Zayas knows the magnitude of this fight. But what stood out to me, watching some of this content before making this video, right, was that Xander was saying he don't need to change nothing. He don't need to fix nothing. He's fine staying how he is, to go in there and win this fight. And he's gonna win this fight fighting his fight, and you're not gonna win this fight like that. Like Floyd Mayweather say, I've never beat a fighter with my A game. See what I'm saying? You got to be able to tap into your B, your C, your D. You know, and I just don't feel like Zayas has that skill set. You know, for me right there, it's not just about experience. I just don't feel like he has that skill set. I haven't seen Zayas fight on the back foot. You know, I haven't seen him work a jab all night. You know, I haven't seen it. You know, I haven't seen him in there, you know, great footwork. You know, I haven't seen him, you know, get better fight from fight to fight, you know, as it pertains to, you know, not leaving himself so open after throwing so many looping shots. You know, he's a guy susceptible to getting caught by Boots, you know, all night just off pure precision and accuracy, right? You know, again, Zayas coming into this fight, you know, he's strong. All these guys strong. Like I always say, close anybody. The Hulk close his eyes and let Mike Tyson catch him. he going to sleep. I don't care if he the Hulk, Thanos. He going night night. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, when we talk about power, you know, power don't really mean much if you can't land it, right? And we've seen how much, you know, we've seen how much Boots has gotten better defensively. He's gotten better defensively. You know, we've seen his footwork get better. You know, when we wanted to see him go in there and push the pace and get a guy out of there, we seen him do it with Villa. Beautiful. I mean, he looked like Philly for real. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, he was the perfect representation of Philly with that type of performance after the narrative that was spreading around during that time, right? You know, and you know, I like Boots because he doesn't have just one bag. You know, he can box. He could walk you down. He could fight on the back foot. You know, he got a jab. You know, he's a switch hitter. You know, he's a guy that knows how to be patient. You know, he's a guy that knows how to pick his shots. He could work top to bottom. You know, and like I always say, you know, skill sets win fight. You know, and not just a certain skill set. You know, now that works when you got two brawlers fighting against each other. Now it's who's the best brawler, right? But when you got a brawler, right, a real aggressive pressure fighter fighting a guy who could box on the back foot, box coming forward, you know, he could keep you at bay with his jab. Why? Because he has a long wingspan. You know, now we have different skill sets that we can put together to create these plan A's, B's, and C's and D's. I just don't see that with Xander Zayas. You know what I'm saying? I just don't see it. You know, I think he's got a lot of power. I think he got a lot of promise. You know, but I just don't think right now is his time. Right now, you know, and I think, you know, this is a perfect example of Styles making fights, right? I think Virgil would have been a better fight than Xander Zayas because Virgil was a guy that, you know, he's been fighting for an opportunity so long. He's been going up and down and up and down, you know, and he's really ready to go in there and prove himself, you know, and that's a different type of energy, you know, than you know, what I see here at least. You know, Xander Zayas again, you know, he's a young champ. You see what I'm saying? You know, he hasn't had the ups and downs of the sport, you know. You know, he's been virtually having his ass kissed, you know, at least these last 3, 4, 5 fights. You know, he's been getting the opportunities that he's wanted. He's been getting promoted like he's wanted to be promoted. You know, so as far as his career, he's in a position where he can't complain, right? Where you got a guy like, you know, Virgil Ortiz, he's in a situation where he wants to make this shit better because he's not in a situation where he's as comfortable as he would like to be. He doesn't feel like he's getting the opportunity. So I felt like, you know, that would have made the fight between Virgil and Boots a lot more competitive. But the fact that Zayas, you know, again, you know, he's a green fighter. You know, he hasn't really been in there with, you know, anybody, you know, that you can at least say is a name or has been in there with names. You know, so you know, shout out to Xander. You know, I think he got power. You know, I think he's a, you know, he's a guy that, you know, is gonna come to fight on fight night. But again, I just can't see him having enough to beat a guy with this many skills. You know, it's like a Shakur Stevenson thing, right? You know, his skill set is what puts the question mark in there, right? You know, it could be a guy, 100 wins, 100 knockouts, fighting Shakur next. The question is gonna be, right? The only thing that make it 50-50 is Shakur's skill set. See what I'm saying? So, you know, again, I think people are misrepresenting both of these guys, but you know, I gotta go Boots. Again, I think this is you know, a fairly calculated fight. You know, the first quarter of this fight, I feel like, you know, between 3 and 6, you know, I feel like we're gonna see Zayas really starting to try to, you know, put it on. You know, I see Boots being smart, being calculated. Between 6 and 9, I see, you know, Boots pushing the pace. Zayas a little bit more slower, and then from there I see 9 to 12. You know, Boots using that athleticism, using that range, to continue to rack up points, stay ahead on the scorecard. You know, and I see this being a victory for Boots Ennis. You know, again, not getting his credit if he's winning this fight, which I think he will, by decision. But I'll give him all the credit in the world because you're beating a guy coming up. You know, you're fighting a guy with a belt. You're fighting a guy with a lot of promise. And, you know, for me, this will boost his stake in the sport. But, you know, y'all know how fans in the sport is fickle, you know. But, you know, he'll get all the credit from me on this channel for beating a guy like Xander Zayas. And, you know, hopefully he beats him. Virgil work out when he work out. You know, those two guys get back, you know, tuned up. You know what I'm saying? And then hopefully we can see that fight between Virgil and Boots, maybe, if not the ending of this year, the beginning, you know, the first quarter of next year.